It's time for Wise Money with Korhorn Financial Group with financial advisors Kevin Korhorn, Mike Bernard, and Josh Gregory.
All right, here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Michiana Marketplace. This is Casey Hendrickson. I am sitting with the founder of Korhorn Financial Group, Kevin Korhorn. How you doing, man?
Doing great, Casey.
So I've known Kevin for quite some time, done a lot of work with KFG, and we're going to talk about you have a business idea out there, you want to start a company, and how you should probably start going about that. So why don't we just start off, Kevin, talk about how you started Korhorn Financial Group. You didn't have any clients. You kind of had basically just an idea and a prayer. So tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, that is right. An idea and a prayer. An idea that we could have a place where people, really busy people, could come and have their whole financial life taken care of. And the other thing that we did when I was getting started 25 years ago is completely different in financial services than it is today. And so you basically were getting started from scratch. I knew no one in town. I'd moved here with my wife, and so it was a prayer. And I said, God, if you want this thing to work, you make it work, because I don't know anyone. It's a relationship business, and so I started on a journey. And I would tell anyone who's starting, when you get ready to start, people talk about work-life balance, and I'd get rid of that idea. I'd say think about more so work-life rhythm. And there are going to be because if it's balance, I'm taking from one to give to the other. But if it's rhythm, actually, I'm going to say harmony. If it's work-life harmony, there are going to be times that you're going to be busier. And over my lifetime, I want harmony. But I don't necessarily want harmony in the first few months or the first few years or maybe the first decade when I'm trying to start a business. Because if you look at the statistics, most businesses fail. So just start with that idea in your mind. Hey, most businesses fail. Now what do I do? And then you work from there.
And something else too, that the businesses that do succeed, most don't even find a way to be self-sufficient until after 3 years. So
Right.
If you have that mentality in your your framework of what you're dealing with, I think you'll probably be okay. Now, one of the things I get a lot of questions about, Kevin, and you're a financial guy, is okay, I have this idea, I have a business that I want to do. Where do I find money? Because sometimes banks are not going to be the place that you get money. And I know that we talk about crowdfunding an awful lot in today's society, but crowdfunding isn't always the easiest thing in the world to do either. And now crowdfunding has become a thing you have to invest in before you get the money. So you got to spend $10,000 to make like $100,000, and a lot of people don't have that $10,000. So how do people find money? And then after they get that money, how do they properly manage it so they don't run out of money? That's another thing that I see a lot in new startups is they burn through their loans real quick, and then they're in trouble paying off their loans.
Right. So finding money is a little bit of a challenge. I once heard it said that your banker is your least loyal business partner. And so the bankers aren't necessarily so disloyal as they are smart. And the reason why the banks have the nicest buildings on the choicest pieces of real estate is they know how to make money. And they don't make money lending money to bad ideas. And so it's very, very, very difficult. I remember early on in my career, when I first wanted to buy my first office building, and I went to the bank and I said, hey, I want to buy this building. And they said, okay, well, you're going to have to put 20% down. And then for the renovation, you need another 20%. And I said, where in the world am I going to get that? That was back in the day when you could get 0% interest from your credit cards, and you could roll your credit cards. It was back in free, loose, and easy credit back in the early 2000s. And so I got $50,000 at 0%, and I rolled it, and I did that for about 3 or 4 years. Now, it's a horrible idea, but it beats not having a building to operate in. And I said, look, I'd rather have a building than a bunch of rent receipts at the end of 10 years, so I'm going to buy the building. So sometimes you have to just find it. And the other thing that you want to think about, if you're going to use someone else's money, are you going to borrow it from them, and so it's a loan, or are you going to give them ownership in the business? And there's a totally different thing because the expectation, if someone lends me money, the expectation is they're going to get paid back a certain interest rate. The more risky I am, the greater the interest rate and the more interest rate that they'll get. If someone wants ownership, they may not be expecting a payback right away, and but they are expecting multiples of what they've put into the business to eventually come back to them. And so I would tell people if you're starting a business, though, there are a couple of ways to do it. If you're starting from scratch, the idea is to shoot bullets and then cannonballs. So do small things. If you currently have a job and you're looking to start a business, I would try to get almost to a point where you're working your day job and the business on the side is almost a full-time job before you kind of phase out of your job, because you have to prove up the business model and you have to prove your idea will actually work and that whatever you're producing, there's someone in the world that wants to buy it and is willing to buy it on a consistent basis. So that doesn't necessarily answer the question. It's very difficult to find money, and for me personally, I found that by being self-funded, I didn't come from money. I didn't have money when I started. A lack of money actually is a good thing. It's a governor on how quickly you can grow. And so if you're disciplined and you have certain principles that you're following, those will guide and govern how quickly you grow and prevent you from growing too quickly and not being sustainable. The other question that you asked about cash, it could be confusing if you and I had a business idea and we put together a business plan and we went to the bank and they were willing to give us a bunch of money. Very quickly we could burn through that money. And I've seen, actually just recently, I had a friend showed me a business plan and said, hey, I want you to put in all of this money and this is how we're going to deal with the money. And I said, well, look, if I was going to put in that money, I wouldn't want to deal with it in the way that you're suggesting. So why don't you start small? Instead of doing 10 of these projects, start with one project. Prove that you can make it on one, and then we can go to the second, and then the third, and then the fourth. And then at some point in time, we may put in a decent-sized pool of money. But I wouldn't start with a big pool of money. So there are two different things. There's a difference between, hey, I've got a job and I'm thinking I want to start a business, versus, hey, I'm actually in a business. I see what they're doing here, but I think I could do it better on my own. Sometimes that's called an entrepreneurial seizure. And so I would encourage anyone who's ever thought about having a business, who has a business, who might someday have a business, to buy the book, The E-Myth Revisited. And if you don't want to buy it, stop by my office. I'll give you a copy. But it's The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, and it's kind of the business Bible, if you will. And it talks about the guy that's doing something that's a technician and that has an entrepreneurial seizure and goes out and starts a business because he's tired of working for the man. And if you're making widgets, you really need two sets of skills. One is to make widgets, and the other is to run the business that makes the widgets. So over time, you have to be prepared to run the miles and make the sacrifice to learn how to do both pieces, because if you don't, it's not going to work.
That's one of the big mistakes that my banker told me is that, hey, a lot of those businesses, they burn through that money that first year, and they just never get off the ground. It's one of those reasons that they fail.
Right.
What are some of the other big mistakes that new entrepreneurs make when they start their companies?
I've seen lots of different companies be wildly successful and lots of companies that didn't work. I think for sure cash management is a huge deal, and making sure that and I ran into this myself early on. Things were going really well, and I said, hey, I want to get my mortgage paid off. And in 2002. There's the third year of kind of a down market, and things really slowed down. And you can't just break off your porch and give it back to the bank if you put the money in your house. So be careful about becoming illiquid, because cash is king. It's like cash, like oxygen. You need it to live. And if you run out of it, I don't care how amazing your business idea is, people won't work for you if you don't have cash to pay them, and the bank will take your machinery back very quickly if you don't have the money to pay them. So I would say cash management is a big deal. Paying your taxes and getting that correct is another big deal. And as a guy with a business degree and lots of accounting classes, it's still very, very, very confusing in understanding balance sheet and profit and loss and how that relates to my taxes and staying current with my taxes. Because if you, there are many days that I would go home and I would say, hey, honey, today I made $1,000. And she would say, great, where is it? Well, guess what? Well, that was the good news, honey. The bad news is the government's going to take self-employment tax, so that's 15%, and then if you're in the 25% tax bracket, now it's 40, and then 5% to the state. So the government's going to take 450 of that right off the top. So it's very confusing because you think, sweet, I made $1,000 today. Yeah, but I've got this IOU to the government, and if I don't make a provision for it real time, when it comes time to file my taxes, it's going to be an awful surprise. And this is where people get into the robbing Peter to pay Paul type of a system.
Government will really seize a bank account very quickly. Much quicker than the IRS will seize your personal bank account, by the way.
Right.
All right, so one last question, Kevin. Talking with Kevin Korhorn, the founder of Korhorn Financial Group, about starting a business is, how do you organize that business when you're starting it up? Do you just do it as your individual self, an LLC, S corp? How do people kind of wrap their heads around that when they're new?
It really depends because one of the things you want to manage is what are your professional fees and expenses. And I'm a believer in working with professionals and building a team of professionals. So anyone can start a business as a sole proprietor, and then there's a Schedule C on your tax return, and you just do that. There are certain advantages and liability protections that come with making a determination of what type of entity structure. And so there are some favorable things about having an S corp, if you will. And so you can set up an LLC and elect to file as an S corp. So there's a lot to it. That's a fairly loaded question. So I would say get great advice. The internet has information. So if you go on the internet and you get information, then a lot of times people think, well, that satisfies what I need. And I would encourage people to seek financial wisdom. So someone who can look and say, hey, at this point in time, you could probably go for 2 or 3 years as a sole proprietor. But when you hit this threshold, that's when you need to incorporate, and this is what type of corporation you should have. The new tax laws have made possibly the idea of a C corp come back into favor. So there's all types of ideas that we would want to take a look at.
Kind of goes back to that management of funds that we talked about a little bit earlier. Some of that stuff has got to go for professionals that have knowledge that you don't have and will not have the time to acquire.
Right.
And you surround yourself with good people, you're going to be okay.
And there are free resources, the SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives. There are organizations that are set up specifically to help people with their business plans and to coach them and guide them and mentor them. And I have found that really successful people, early on in my career, there was this guy in our office who was incredibly successful, and he was kind of known nationwide. And I thought, well, there'd be a lineup outside his door. No one could get in and get access to Tom. Well, guess what? I went right to Tom and said, hey, Tom, I want you to teach me. And he said, yeah, I'll teach you. And so don't be afraid to ask. The early bird gets the worm, but also the bird that's seeking the worm gets the worm too.
What was the name of that book again, Kevin?
The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. And again, go to your local bookstore. It's a great audiobook and easy to listen to, or stop by Korhorn Financial Group. I'll give you a copy. I'll sign it. I didn't author it, but
You'll sign it anyway.
I'll put an inscription in there.
There you go. Kevin Korhorn, founder of Korhorn Financial Group. Appreciate you joining Michiana Marketplace with us today. For the rest of you out there, take his advice. And you know what? If you have an idea, run with it. At least explore it but be smart about it as well. Again, Kevin, thank you very much for joining Michiana Marketplace. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Casey.
Securities offered through Silver Oak Securities, member FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through KFG Wealth Management, LLC. Doing business as Korhorn Financial Group. KFG Wealth Management, LLC and Silver Oak Securities Incorporated companies are unaffiliated.